Hey everybody, Christine here. Today we're going to be working on an edit recipe form, so let me go ahead and show you. You can see we have an edit recipe button, and when we click it, we'll see our edit form pop up and pre-populate with all of our recipe information. In this video, we'll be focusing on the recipe information itself, and in the next video, we'll go down and focus on importing all of these ingredients. Alright, without further ado, let's get started. To get started, we're going to focus on grabbing the information of the recipe selected in Recipe View. To do this, we need an ID of each recipe that we can reference in our code. Let's go to our Recipe Tables tab. Scroll to the right until we get to the end of the table. Then just type in ID in the first blank column and push Enter. A new table column will automatically be added. Now let's go to the first row and type $row, open and closing parentheses. When suggested autofill pops up, click that check mark. If you missed the suggested autofill, you can also select that cell, click the blue circle at the bottom right, and drag it all the way down. Now let's go back to our Recipe View tab. We're going to add a reference to the ID anywhere in the header. Later, when we're all done setting this up, we can go back and make it invisible, so location isn't super important. I'm going to put it to the right of my recipe name. And to make my life easier, I'm going to grab that formula from ratings and copy it into H2. And then I'm going to change recipe rating to recipe ID. Now I'm going to make extra space on the right side of the header for our buttons. First, I move my filter section over a few columns to the right to give me more space to make the recipe wider. Then I move my text content in the header left a little bit. Next, I have to readjust the column widths to make everything fit properly again. I decide at this point that my ID might fit better in cell G3, so I move it there. Then I make my header wider by adding more color to the right side. I move on to adjusting the border around the instructions to give it more width. Then I fix my filter section, moving it a little closer to the recipe, and then I adjust the columns. I finish it up by adding color to the footer to make it fit the rest of the recipe. Now let's draw our Edit button. Go to the top toolbar and select Insert. Then choose Drawing option from the drop-down. Click the shape icon, and choose a rectangle. Draw out the rectangle. I'm making my button gray to stand out against the blue. Then I change the border color to a slightly darker version of the background to give it a little illusion of being more 3D. Now I want to add an icon, so I choose the image icon on the right side of the toolbar and go to the Google Images tab. Search for an edit icon, choose one you like, and then insert it. Adjust the size to fit within the button, and then drag it over into place. Let's add some text to our button by choosing the text icon and then drawing out our text box. Type out the text and then drag it over into place. Then I swap the font to one that matches the rest of my sheet. Next, adjust the positioning and size of everything until everything looks balanced. I decide to swap my icon for a black one so it fits the font color of the rest of my buttons. When you're done, hit Save and Close. Finally, let's adjust the size of our button and then drag it over where we want it. Now that we have our button prepared, let's move on to the code. Open up AppScripts and then go into your code.js file. Here we're going to create the function that grabs the data of the recipe that is selected on Recipe View sheet. First step is to make a function, so type out const get recipe data =, open and closing parentheses, arrow, curly braces. Inside of the curly brackets, we will start by grabbing the recipe view sheet. So type out const view sheet equals spreadsheet app dot get active, open and closing parentheses, dot get sheet by name, open parentheses, and in quotes, recipe view, closing parentheses. Now we need to get the specific cell where our ID is, so let's type out const row index equals viewsheet dot get range open parentheses in quotes G3, or wherever you place your recipe ID in the recipe view header, closing parentheses dot get value open closing parentheses. Next up, we want to access the sheet where our recipe table lives, so type out const datasheet equals spreadsheet app dot get active open closing parentheses dot get sheet by name open parentheses and then in quotes recipes closing parentheses. And finally, we can actually grab the row information for the specific recipe selected on recipe view. So let's type out const recipe info equals datasheet dot get range open parentheses row index comma 1 comma 1 comma datasheet dot get last column open and closing parentheses and one more closing parenthesis dot get values open and closing parentheses dot flat open and closing parentheses. Let's take a moment to explain the working parts here, because I know that it might seem like a lot on first glance. GetRange has 4 parameters: starting row, starting column, number of rows, number of columns. We use getLastColumn to figure out how many columns we actually need without having to open up our sheet and count out the columns ourselves. The getValues is exactly what it sounds like. We only want the values out of those cells, not additional information. Then we use flat, because if we don't, we will end up with an array inside of an array, and we want our data as simple and easy to use as possible. Alright, on the next row, let's type out return recipe info. This ensures that when we use the function, we actually get the recipe information out of it. Let's go ahead and test it out. Before the return line, write console.log parentheses recipe info closing parentheses. Now outside of the function, type get recipe data open and closing parentheses. Let's hit that run button and see what we have in the console that pops up. There's a little error on mine. It comes from me putting the wrong cell in the get range line. I had actually moved my index number to G3 while changing up the recipe view layout and forgotten about it. So I'm just going to swap it real quick and run it again. Here we see things are mostly okay, but our image is returning something much more complicated than what we need. This won't work to add a URL into our edit form, so we need to fix this. The solution I have requires a little restructuring of the project so far, so let's get into it. First, hop over to the recipe table. Right-click on the B column, or wherever your images are, and then insert a column to the right. Rename this column Image URL. Try and get all of the original URLs to your recipes and paste them as text inside of this column. Once you have that finished, go to your first image and replace it with an equal sign, image, parentheses, a reference to the next cell. Then click that cell again and drag the blue circle all the way down to the bottom of your table. Now let's go back into our code.js file. Find the add recipe function. Inside of the order.forEach section of the function, after row.pushFormula, add a new line and type row.push parentheses recipe square bracket I closing square bracket closing parentheses. Let's save the file and do a quick test to see if it's running properly. Click the Add New Recipe button and put in a little bit of data. We don't need much, just a title and an image URL. Save the recipe and then go back to your recipe table sheet. If you see the image and the URL, everything is working correctly. Alright, now that our add recipe is adjusted, let's go back into our get recipe data. What we're going to do here is remove that image from the row, leaving only the URL. We can remove specific elements from an array using a splice. And to count the position of the thing we want to remove, we start counting at 0 rather than 1, and this will give us the index, or in other words, the position of the item in the array. We know our image is at position 1, so above the console log, type out recipeinfo.splice, parentheses, 1, 1, closing parentheses. Now push the run button again and see what we have. Alright, this is something we can work with. Let's go ahead and remove the console log and where we're calling the function getRecipeData below. Now we can move on to actually making the edit form. The first thing we're going to do is copy our new recipe form. Hover over the new recipe form in your left File Explorer bar and click the three-dot icon. Click Make a Copy and give it the name Edit Recipe Form. Now go back into code.js. We need to make the function open it up. This one is going to use a different way to open the form because we want to make it a template, meaning we can add values into it from our code.js file. So let's get started by typing out const open edit recipe equal sign open and closing parentheses arrow curly braces. The first thing we will do is get the recipe data, so type out const recipe data equals get recipe data open and closing parentheses. Now we need to grab the file, so type out const template equal sign HTML service dot create template from file parentheses and in quotes edit recipe form. And then we need to give the template the recipe data, so on the next line let's type out template.recipe_data equals recipe data. And now we can actually open up the form with const HTML equals template.evaluate open and closing parentheses. Let's go ahead and match the size of our window to our new recipe form by typing out HTML dot set width open parentheses 700 closing parentheses, and then on the next line HTML dot set height open parentheses 600 closing parentheses. Now we need to open up our modal, which is the pop-up window, and give it a title. So let's type spreadsheet app dot get UI open and closing parentheses dot show modal dialog open parentheses HTML comma and in quotes edit space recipe in parentheses. Go ahead and click that save button. Now let's connect this function to our button. Go back to your spreadsheet and right-click your edit button to make the three-dot icon appear. Click the three-dot icon and choose Assign Script. In the pop-up that appears, type Open Edit Recipe and click Save. Now let's click the button to make sure it's working. We should see the entry form with all of the inputs blank, and that means things are looking perfect. Now that we have our form, we need to connect it to the row so that when we save it, we can save it to the correct location. To do this, we are going to add an input that holds our ID and then hides it so users won't be able to see it. It'll make our lives easier to have a reference for all of our index numbers to use while we build this form. So let's grab our headers from the recipe table, make a new tab to hold them, and then paste all of them as values only. Go ahead and delete the image column. Below the headers, starting at 0, start counting up to get each index number for the column. Once you get to around 2, you can select the numbers and drag the blue circle all the way to the right. And now we have a handy reference form for our index numbers. And in mine, we can see that the ID is at index 15. So head back into your edit recipe form. Let's type out a new input tag at the top of our form. Next, let's give it the ID attribute equal to row index. Next, we are going to preset the information in the input. So go ahead and start typing value equals, and in quotes, open angle bracket, question mark, equals, recipe data, open square bracket, 15, closing square bracket, a question mark, the closing angle brace, end quote. The chunk of code we set the value to is what makes this a template. This is how we input data into our form from our Code.js file. Let's check to see if it worked. Hit that save icon and go back into your sheet and click Edit Recipe. You should see an input with an ID number in it at the very top. Now we can go back into our Edit Recipe Form HTML file, and we're going to hide this input by giving it the type attribute equal to, and in quotes, hidden. We can now start populating the rest of our inputs. Go ahead and copy the value part of the row index input. In each input, paste it and change the number to whatever we have in our reference sheet for that input. For example, name is 0, image link is 1, rating is 3. Moving on to dropdowns, replace the empty value attribute in the Options tab with a pasted version and update the index number to the appropriate number. After that, swap loading with the part of our value that's between the quotes. We're going to skip ingredients for now and come back to it later. For text area, instead of giving the opening tag a value, what we need to do is just take the part between the quotes, like we did in the option for dropdown, and place it between the two text area tags. Then update the number. Continue with the rest of the inputs as normal. This part is sped up, so pause the video here if you need more time. Once you're done adding your values, let's go ahead and save our work. And then let's go open the edit form and see if it's working properly. Things are mostly good except for the dropdowns. Before they load, if a recipe has 2 tags, we're not seeing 2 separate tags, we're seeing the text merged into 1 tag. And then when the dropdowns do load, we see the selected values changed to the default. So let's work on fixing that now. Go into your script tag and find the load event listener. Below the line, const dropdown, etc., etc. Let's add this. Const selected values equals quote open angle bracket question mark equal sign recipe data square bracket for closing square bracket question mark closing angle bracket quote dot split open parentheses and then a comma in quotes closing parentheses dot map open parentheses tag arrow tag dot trim open closing parentheses and then 1 additional closing parentheses. Next, let's go into the options.forEach loop. Just before we append child, let's add an if statement to select the new option if it's in the selected values array. So type out if parentheses selected values dot includes open parentheses option closing parentheses open curly braces O.selected equals true, closing curly brace. Now we just have to repeat this process for the next two dropdowns. What I'm going to do is copy the selected value line and paste it in the right position. Then I'll update the number to reflect the current index position. Next, I'm just going to copy that if statement and plop it in place in both of the other dropdown sections. Let's save our work and test it out. Alright, it's keeping its values, but it's not keeping both when there are multiple tags. It only keeps one. Now what we need to do is adjust the dropdowns to actually allow multiple selections. Let's go back into our HTML form, and in the blocks for the dropdowns, in the opening select tags, all we have to do is add the text multiple. Go ahead and save it and have another look. Give it a moment. And there it is. Both of them are selected. Alright guys, that's the first part of the edit form done. In our next video, we'll be focusing on importing those ingredients. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe. It really helps my channel, and thank you so much for watching. Alright, I hope to see you in the next one. Bye now.